The morning my daughter looked at me and asked, "Are you crazy?" I didn't argue. I just held the new bank card tighter in my hand and stayed quiet. For years, everyone else had decided what was best for me, where my money went, what I needed, how much control I deserved. They thought I was confused, maybe even afraid. But that day wasn't about fighting with them. It was about finally choosing myself. And when my pension arrived somewhere they didn't expect, the silence in that house said more than any apology ever could. The morning my daughter asked if I had lost my mind, I didn't argue with her. I just stood there holding the new bank card between my fingers, feeling the weight of something I should have done years ago. Her voice sounded louder than the kitchen clock. Sharp, worried, maybe even a little afraid. But what she didn't understand was that this wasn't a moment of confusion. It was the first moment of clarity I had felt in a long time. I remember the way the sunlight touched the counter that day, soft and quiet, like it was trying not to interrupt us. She looked at me as if I had suddenly become someone else. Maybe I had, because for years I let everyone else decide what was best for me, where my pension went, what bills I paid, even how much money I was allowed to keep in my own wallet. It didn't happen overnight. Control never does. It slips away slowly, disguised as care. First, it was small things. My son-in-law offering to help manage my payments because online banking felt confusing. My daughter saying it would be safer if everything went through their account. They told me it was for my protection. And I believed them because mothers are trained to trust their children's intentions. If this story is already touching something inside you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to American Granny Stories. Sometimes sharing our stories is the only way we remember we're not alone. Back then, I told myself I was lucky. Many women my age didn't have family nearby. I had a house full of voices, laughter at dinner, someone to drive me to appointments. But slowly, the laughter felt rehearsed. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Financial letters stopped coming in my name. And whenever I asked questions, the answers were always gentle but dismissive. "Mom, don't worry about it," my daughter would say. "We've got everything handled." Handled. That word stayed with me longer than it should have. One afternoon, I sat alone in the living room while they were out. The house felt too quiet. I opened a drawer searching for old photos and found a folder instead. Inside were copies of statements I barely recognized. Numbers moved in ways I didn't understand. Transfers I never approved. I told myself there must be a reasonable explanation. After all, doubt is uncomfortable when it involves your own children. Still, that night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying small moments in my head. The way my son-in-law quickly changed the subject when money came up. The way my daughter avoided eye contact whenever I asked about my pension. It wasn't anger that grew inside me. It was something heavier. A quiet realization that maybe I had slowly stepped out of my own life without noticing. The next week, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and strangely peaceful. I walked into the bank alone. The woman behind the counter smiled kindly when I told her I wanted to change my account information. My hands trembled as I signed the forms. Not because I was unsure, but because it had been so long since I made a financial decision without someone else guiding me. When she handed me the new card, I felt something shift deep inside my chest. Not rebellion, not revenge, just ownership. If you've ever had to reclaim a part of yourself that others thought belonged to them, tell me in the comments. Stories like yours remind others they're not imagining their own feelings. I didn't tell my daughter right away. I wanted to sit with the decision first. I wanted to see if I felt guilty. Instead, I felt lighter. Like I had finally opened a window in a room that had been closed for years. The confrontation came 3 days later when a letter from the bank arrived at the house. She held it in her hand, eyebrows tight with concern. "Mom, what is this?" she asked. I told her calmly. I expected anger, but what came first was disbelief. She kept repeating that I didn't understand how complicated finances were, that I might make a mistake, that she was only trying to help me. My son-in-law stood behind her, silent but watchful. Then came the question that changed everything. "Are you crazy?" she said. It didn't feel like an insult. It felt like fear. Maybe she wasn't afraid of losing control over my money. Maybe she was afraid of losing the version of me who never questioned anything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself with long explanations. I simply told her that my pension would start arriving on my new card next month. The room grew quiet in a way I had never experienced before. Even the refrigerator hum sounded louder. That evening, I sat alone again, wondering if I had just created a distance between us that couldn't be repaired. Change has a way of revealing truths we try to ignore. And part of me worried that maybe I had misunderstood everything. But the next morning, I checked my account and saw a small deposit already transferred. My name, my decision, my responsibility. For the first time in years, I felt like the author of my own life instead of a guest inside it. What I didn't realize then was how much this single decision would shift the balance inside our home. Because control doesn't disappear quietly. It reacts. It questions. And sometimes it pushes back in ways you never expect. That night at dinner, my daughter barely spoke to me. My son-in-law avoided looking in my direction. And I began to sense that the real conversation hadn't happened yet. Dinner that night felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. My daughter pushed food around her plate without really eating. My son-in-law kept checking his phone, his jaw tight in a way that told me he was thinking more than he was saying. I tried to talk about ordinary things, the neighbor's new dog, a recipe I wanted to try, but my words seemed to land somewhere between us and disappear. Silence has a way of growing louder when people are afraid to say what they feel. After a while, my daughter finally spoke. Her voice was softer than before, but it carried a kind of tension that made my chest ache. She told me she was worried I might get scammed, that older people were targets, that she didn't want me to lose everything I had worked for. And for a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to hold my hand tightly when crossing the street. I nodded because I knew her concern wasn't completely fake. But concern and control sometimes wear the same clothes. I appreciate your help, I said quietly, but I need to be responsible for my own choices again. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward her husband, almost as if she was waiting for him to respond for her. That was the moment something inside me shifted again. I realized how many of our conversations had slowly turned into negotiations I never agreed to. If this part of the story feels familiar, take a second to like the video. Every like tells YouTube that real stories about real families deserve to be heard. The following days were uncomfortable. Not dramatic, not explosive, just heavy. My daughter stopped asking me about small things. The casual warmth between us faded into politeness. And my son-in-law began speaking in careful sentences, choosing words as if he were stepping across thin ice. One afternoon, I overheard them talking in the hallway. They didn't know I was awake. "She doesn't understand what she's doing," my son-in-law whispered. "She thinks she does," my daughter replied. "But what if she makes a mistake? What if we can't fix it?" I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling both sadness and strength at the same time. For years, I had believed that being loved meant letting others make decisions for me. Now I was learning that love sometimes feels uncomfortable when boundaries change. The first pension payment arrived a week later. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand, refreshing the bank app over and over again. When the notification finally appeared, my heart raced like it had when I was young and waiting for important news. The number wasn't huge. It wasn't life-changing. But seeing it deposited directly into my account felt like reclaiming a piece of my voice. I didn't celebrate loudly. I just made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching cars pass slowly down the street. For the first time in years, I felt calm without needing anyone's approval. That evening, I offered to cook dinner. My daughter hesitated before agreeing, almost as if she didn't know how to behave around this new version of me. As we ate, she asked a question that sounded simple but carried layers beneath it. "So, what are you planning to do now?" she said. I smiled gently. "Live responsibly," I answered, "but live as myself." She looked down at her plate. I could see the conflict inside her, part of her wanting to protect me, another part unsure how to let go of control she had grown used to holding. If you're watching and thinking about a moment when you had to choose yourself, share it in the comments. Someone reading your words might find the courage they need tonight. The tension didn't disappear overnight. Small things changed slowly. I began receiving my own mail again. I scheduled my own appointments. I even bought a new sweater without asking anyone's opinion first. These were tiny decisions, but each one felt like a quiet step back into my own life. One afternoon, my daughter came into my room holding a folder. "We should review some of your expenses," she said carefully. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't neutral either. I realized she wasn't ready to let go completely. And maybe I didn't expect her to. Change takes time for everyone involved. "I'll handle it," I replied gently. She froze for a second, clearly not used to hearing that answer from me. The room felt heavier again. But instead of arguing, she nodded slowly and left. That night, I sat alone thinking about the past. I remembered the years when I had sacrificed things quietly, my time, my dreams, even parts of my independence, because I believed it kept the family together. And maybe it did for a while. But I also wondered how many women reach a point where they realize they've been living in a version of their own life designed by others. The next morning brought something I didn't expect. My son-in-law knocked on my door. Not a loud knock, just 2 soft taps. He sat across from me at the table, his expression serious. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "We need to talk about the house expenses," he said. The way he said "we" felt different this time, less like a partnership and more like a warning. I sensed that this conversation wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, responsibility, and the quiet power shift that had started the moment I walked into that bank alone. And as he opened the folder in front of me, I realized that reclaiming my independence might come with consequences I hadn't fully imagined. He opened the folder slowly, as if the papers inside carried more weight than they actually did. My daughter stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching both of us with a mixture of concern and uncertainty. I could feel the tension before a single word was spoken. It wasn't anger filling the room. It was adjustment, the uncomfortable process of everyone realizing that things were not the same anymore. "These are the monthly costs," my son-in-law said, sliding a sheet toward me. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. Utilities, groceries, maintenance, everything. I studied the numbers carefully. For years, I had trusted them to manage these details. Now, seeing everything written in front of me felt both empowering and overwhelming. I noticed expenses I didn't recognize, subscriptions I never used, small charges that had quietly added up over time. "I didn't realize some of these were this high," I said gently. My daughter shifted her weight. "We were just trying to keep things running smoothly, Mom," she replied. "I know," I said, meeting her eyes. "And I'm grateful for that. But I need to understand where my money goes." The conversation stayed polite, but beneath every sentence was a quiet negotiation about boundaries. My son-in-law explained how they had structured payments, how my pension had been part of a shared household system. For the first time, I realized that my independence didn't just affect me. It changed the balance for everyone living under the same roof. If this moment reminds you of a time when standing up for yourself felt complicated, take a second to like the video and subscribe to American Granny Stories. These stories are more than entertainment. They're reflections of real lives. As we talked, something unexpected happened. Instead of arguing, my daughter sat down beside me. Her shoulders softened slightly. She asked me questions instead of giving instructions. It wasn't a full transformation, but it was a small shift. The first sign that maybe she was starting to see me not as someone fragile, but as someone capable again. Still, the tension didn't disappear. Later that evening, I overheard another conversation in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the worry in them was clear. "What if she makes decisions we can't control?" my son-in-law said. "She's my mom," my daughter whispered. "I just don't want her to get hurt." I stood there quietly, feeling the familiar pull of guilt. It would have been easy to walk back into the room and promise to let them handle everything again. Old habits don't fade quickly. They sit inside you, waiting for moments of doubt. But instead, I returned to my bedroom and opened my notebook. I began writing down my own budget for the first time in years. Each number felt like a statement of trust in myself. The next morning, I went for a walk alone. The air felt crisp against my face, and for a moment I realized how long it had been since I made plans without consulting anyone first. Freedom doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's just choosing your own direction without explaining why. When I returned home, my daughter was sitting at the kitchen table holding her phone. She looked up at me, her expression softer than it had been all week. "I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe we should set some clear boundaries so everyone feels secure." Her words surprised me. Instead of resistance, I heard an attempt to understand. We talked for nearly an hour, calmly outlining responsibilities. I agreed to contribute fairly to shared expenses. She agreed to step back from managing my personal accounts. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. If you've ever had to rebuild trust inside your own family, share your thoughts in the comments. Someone reading your story might feel less alone tonight. For a few days, the house felt lighter. We laughed again during dinner. My daughter even asked me for advice about something unrelated to money, and hearing her seek my opinion reminded me of the connection we once had. But peace has a way of revealing deeper truths. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed directly to me. It was from the bank, confirming changes I had made weeks earlier. I placed it on the table without thinking much of it. My son-in-law picked it up, his expression tightening as he read. "You didn't mention this part," he said. I frowned slightly. "What part?" He pointed to a line in the letter, a section about adjusting automatic transfers that had previously been set up. Transfers I hadn't fully understood before. The room grew quiet again. My daughter looked between us, sensing the shift. "You removed the shared payment authorization," he said slowly. I nodded, because I wanted full control over my account. His reaction wasn't loud, but it was firm. He explained how that change affected certain household payments. For the first time, frustration showed clearly on his face. I felt a flicker of doubt. Had I moved too quickly? Had I overlooked something important? Independence sometimes comes with mistakes, and I wasn't immune to that. Still, I reminded myself why I had taken this step in the first place. Not to create distance. Not to punish anyone. Simply to live with dignity. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I realized something deeper was happening beneath the surface. My daughter wasn't just struggling with financial changes. She was struggling with the idea that her mother no longer needed constant protection. And my son-in-law, he was adjusting to a shift in control that affected the structure he had grown comfortable with. As the days passed, subtle tensions returned. Conversations paused when I entered the room. Decisions were discussed without me again, not about my money this time, but about the house itself. I sensed that something larger was being planned, though no one said it directly. One evening, I found a stack of documents on the counter. Property papers, renovation estimates, notes written in my daughter's handwriting. My heart tightened as I read a few lines. It seemed they were considering financial changes that involved the house we all lived in. And suddenly, I realized that reclaiming my own money might be only the first chapter of a much bigger story. The papers on the counter stayed in my mind long after I put them back exactly where I had found them. I didn't want to assume anything, but the words refinance and equity review kept echoing quietly inside my thoughts. For years, I had trusted that the home we shared was a safe place, something steady and familiar. Now I wondered if changes were happening around me faster than I realized. That evening, I decided not to stay silent. At dinner, I mentioned the documents casually, trying to keep my voice calm. My daughter paused mid-bite, exchanging a quick glance with her husband. It was a small moment, but it told me more than any explanation could. "We were just exploring options," she said carefully. "Options that involve the house?" I asked. My son-in-law leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. "We're thinking about long-term stability," he replied. "Nothing has been decided yet." The word stability sounded reasonable, but something about the tone made me uneasy. I had learned recently that reasonable words sometimes hide complicated truths. If you've ever felt that quiet shift in a conversation, the moment you realize there's more beneath the surface, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to American Granny Stories. Stories like this remind us how powerful awareness can be. Over the next few days, I watched carefully, without confronting anyone directly. I noticed more phone calls taken outside, more whispered discussions that ended when I entered the room. I didn't feel angry, but I did feel determined not to lose myself again. One morning, I decided to visit the bank once more. Not because I distrusted my daughter, but because I wanted clarity. The advisor greeted me warmly and helped me review every detail of my account. Together, we went through automatic payments, past transfers, and current balances. Seeing everything clearly felt like turning on a light in a room that had been dim for years. "You're doing the right thing by staying informed," the advisor said kindly. Those words stayed with me all the way home. When I walked through the front door, my daughter was sitting at the kitchen table looking tired. Dark circles under her eyes told me she had been carrying her own worries. For a moment, I hesitated, wondering if independence had created more distance between us than I intended. "I went to the bank today," I told her gently. She looked up, surprised. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "I just wanted to understand things better." There was a pause. Then she sighed softly. "Mom, we weren't trying to hide anything about the house. We just didn't want to stress you." Her honesty softened something inside me. I realized she wasn't acting out of cruelty. She was acting out of a belief that shielding me meant protecting me. "But keeping me in the dark makes me feel smaller," I said quietly. "I don't want to live that way anymore." She nodded slowly, absorbing my words. If this part of the story resonates with you, that moment when honesty finally begins to replace silence, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might help someone else find theirs. Later that evening, my son-in-law joined us at the table with a folder. Instead of tension, there was a cautious openness in the air. He explained that they had been considering refinancing the house to manage rising expenses and future plans. Hearing it directly from him felt different than discovering it accidentally. "I understand planning ahead," I said, "but I need to be part of conversations that affect my home too." He hesitated, then nodded. It wasn't a dramatic apology, but it was acknowledgement. For a few days, things felt balanced again. We discussed budgets openly. We shared responsibilities more clearly. I even helped review grocery expenses, something I hadn't done in years. The act of participating instead of being managed filled me with a quiet confidence. But growth often comes with unexpected tests. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped me outside while I watered the plants. She mentioned seeing a real estate agent visiting the house earlier in the week. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to keep my expression calm, thanking her for the casual comment, but inside I felt a familiar wave of uncertainty rising again. Had I misunderstood the situation? Were they planning something bigger than refinancing? That night, I waited until everyone was home before bringing it up. My voice stayed gentle, but firm. "A neighbor mentioned a real estate agent," I said. "Can we talk about that?" The room grew quiet. My daughter looked startled, while my son-in-law rubbed the back of his neck before answering. "We were just exploring possibilities," he said. "Nothing is finalized. Exploring possibilities." The same phrase from before, but this time it felt heavier. I listened carefully as they explained that rising costs and future plans had made them think about whether staying in this house long-term was realistic. They spoke about opportunities, about moving closer to better schools, about financial strategies that sounded logical on paper. But as they spoke, I realized something deeper. They were imagining a future that might not include the same space for me. The thought didn't bring anger. It brought clarity. Independence wasn't just about money anymore. It was about understanding where I stood in the life we had built together. That night, I sat by the window long after everyone went to bed. The streetlights cast long shadows across the floor, and I thought about how quickly life can shift when you begin to see things clearly. I had taken back control of my finances. I had reclaimed my voice. But now I faced a new question, one I hadn't expected when I first walked into that bank. Was it time to start imagining a future that belonged fully to me, even if it meant stepping into unfamiliar territory? That question stayed with me all night. I watched the quiet street outside my window, wondering how a single decision about my own money had slowly uncovered deeper changes around me. Independence has a way of revealing truths we don't always expect to see. And as much as I loved my daughter, I knew something inside our home had shifted permanently. The next morning, I made breakfast earlier than usual. I wanted to speak before the day filled with distractions. My daughter joined me at the table, still half asleep, wrapping her hands around a warm mug. For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, the kind that used to feel normal between us. "I need to ask you something honestly," I said gently. She looked up, cautious but open. "Okay. Are you planning a future that doesn't include me living here?" The question hung in the air longer than either of us expected. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared down at her coffee, her expression torn between guilt and worry. "It's not about excluding you," she said finally. "It's about planning ahead. We thought maybe a smaller place might be easier for everyone." Her words were careful, but they carried a truth I had already sensed. Change wasn't just financial. It was emotional. And part of me understood that every family evolves, sometimes in ways that feel uncomfortable. "I don't want to be a burden," I said softly. "But I also don't want decisions made without me." She reached across the table, touching my hand. That simple gesture reminded me that love was still there beneath all the tension. If this moment reminds you of a conversation you've been afraid to have with someone you love, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to American Granny Stories. Sometimes hearing another person's journey gives us courage to start our own. Later that afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I began exploring possibilities for myself. I opened my laptop and searched for small apartments nearby. Not because I was ready to leave, but because I wanted to know I had options. Independence doesn't always mean walking away. Sometimes it simply means knowing you could. As I looked through listings, a strange mix of emotions filled me. Excitement, sadness, relief, fear. Every photo of a quiet little living room or a sunlit balcony felt like a glimpse into a different chapter of my life. When my son-in-law came home, he noticed the screen and paused. Instead of reacting defensively, he sat beside me. "You're really thinking about moving?" he asked. "I'm thinking about being prepared," I replied. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since all of this began, his expression softened completely. "I guess we all are," he said quietly. That evening, the three of us sat together and talked more openly than we had in weeks. There were no raised voices, no accusations, just honesty. They admitted they had been worried about balancing their own future plans with my needs. I admitted that losing control over my finances had made me feel invisible. Listening to each other didn't solve everything, but it created space for understanding. If you've ever experienced that moment when truth finally replaces tension, share your thoughts in the comments. Someone reading your words tonight might realize they're not alone in their own family struggles. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the house slowly changed. My daughter began asking my opinion more often. My son-in-law stopped speaking in guarded tones. And I found myself rediscovering small parts of my independence, choosing my own schedule, managing my own expenses, even planning short outings alone. One afternoon, I visited a small apartment complex just a few streets away. The manager showed me a bright little unit with a window facing a garden. Standing there, I felt a surprising sense of peace. It wasn't about leaving my family behind. It was about creating a space where my decisions belonged entirely to me. I didn't sign anything that day. I simply walked through the rooms, imagining what life might feel like there. When I returned home, my daughter asked where I had been. I told her honestly. She listened quietly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and acceptance. "I never wanted you to feel pushed out," she said softly. "I know," I replied, "and I never wanted to stop being part of your life. But I also need to feel whole as a person." She nodded, and for the first time, there were tears in her eyes, not from anger, but from understanding. That night, as I prepared for bed, I realized how much had changed in such a short time. The woman who once hesitated to open her own bank account was now considering a future shaped by her own choices. The journey hadn't been loud or dramatic. It had been quiet, filled with small decisions that slowly reshaped my sense of self. But just as things began to feel steady, an unexpected phone call arrived the next morning, one that would force me to make a decision sooner than I had planned. The bank advisor informed me that a financial adjustment connected to the house might require my signature if I still intended to remain part of certain shared agreements. Hearing that made my heart race. It wasn't just about independence anymore. It was about choosing what kind of future I truly wanted. And for the first time, I realized that the next step might define not only my relationship with my family, but my relationship with myself. The phone call from the bank stayed in my thoughts long after I hung up. I sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at my hands, realizing that every small choice I had made recently was leading me towards something bigger. Independence wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was becoming a series of real decisions with lasting consequences. When my daughter came downstairs, she noticed the seriousness on my face right away. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I told her about the call, about the documents that might require my signature, about the possibility that the future of the house could change sooner than any of us expected. She listened carefully, her expression shifting from worry to determination. "We should talk about this together," she said. That afternoon, the three of us sat in the living room with the paperwork spread across the coffee table. The sunlight coming through the curtains felt warm but heavy, like the room itself understood the importance of the moment. My son-in-law explained the financial details slowly, making sure I followed every step. For the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider in the conversation. I felt like an equal participant. The decision wasn't simple. Signing the documents would keep our financial paths connected. Refusing would create a clearer boundary, one that might change how we lived together moving forward. If this part of the story makes you think about your own boundaries, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to American Granny Stories. Sometimes a simple story can open doors to deeper understanding. That evening, I went for a long walk alone. The sky was turning a soft shade of orange, and the quiet rhythm of my footsteps gave me space to think. I remembered the years when I had sacrificed my own comfort to keep peace inside the family. I remembered how small I had felt when I no longer controlled my own money. And I remembered the strength I felt the day I walked into the bank by myself. When I returned home, I knew what I needed to do. I sat down with my daughter and son-in-law and spoke calmly. "I love this family," I began, "but I need my future to be fully mine. I don't want financial ties that make anyone feel responsible for me or give anyone control over my choices." My daughter's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly. My son-in-law looked thoughtful, almost relieved. "So, you're not signing?" he asked gently. "I'm choosing independence," I said. The words felt steady and true. There was no argument, no dramatic reaction, just a quiet acceptance that things were changing in a way none of us could ignore. That night, we shared dinner without tension for the first time in weeks. The conversation wasn't about money or plans. It was about memories, about old family stories that reminded us why we cared for each other in the first place. If this moment resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Someone out there might be standing at the same crossroads, unsure which path to take. Over the next few days, I focused on preparing for whatever came next. I reviewed my finances carefully. I visited the small apartment again, this time bringing a notebook to imagine how I might arrange the space. The idea of living alone no longer felt frightening. It felt peaceful, like opening a new chapter written in my own handwriting. One afternoon, my daughter joined me for coffee at a small cafe nearby. We talked openly, without defensiveness or fear. "I guess I thought protecting you meant making decisions for you," she admitted. "And I thought being a good mother meant never questioning you," I replied. We both laughed softly, realizing how easily love can become tangled with control. When I returned home that evening, I found a handwritten note on my bedroom door. It was from my son-in-law. "Thank you for trusting us enough to be honest," it read. That simple sentence meant more than he probably realized. It told me that independence didn't have to destroy connection. It could redefine it in a healthier way. The following week, I signed the lease for the small apartment. I didn't rush the process. I told my daughter gently, giving her time to absorb the change. She hugged me tightly, whispering that she was proud of me even though it would feel strange not having me in the same house every day. Moving day arrived quietly. There were no dramatic goodbyes, just careful packing, shared laughter over old photos, and a sense of mutual respect that hadn't existed before. As I placed the last box into my new living room, I felt a wave of calm settle over me. The space was small, but it was entirely mine. That night, I sat by the window watching the lights from nearby homes flicker on one by one. I thought about how my daughter had once asked if I had lost my mind. Maybe, in a way, I had lost the part of me that believed I needed permission to live fully. If this story has touched you even a little, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to American Granny Stories. Every shared story reminds us that growth can happen at any age. Weeks passed, and our family relationship slowly found a new balance. My daughter visited often, not to manage my life, but to share it. My son-in-law spoke to me with a respect that felt natural rather than cautious. And I discovered that independence didn't mean loneliness. It meant choosing connection instead of depending on it. One evening, my daughter sat across from me at my small kitchen table. She looked around the apartment, smiling softly. "You seem lighter," she said. "I feel lighter," I replied. She laughed gently. "Maybe you weren't crazy after all." I smiled back, realizing how far we had come from that first tense conversation in the kitchen. The journey had been uncomfortable at times, but it had led us towards something stronger, a relationship built on honesty rather than silent expectations. And as I sat there, holding a cup of tea in my own home, I understood the real lesson behind everything that had happened. Taking control of my own money wasn't just about finances. It was about remembering who I was before fear and convenience slowly reshaped my life. It was about teaching my daughter and myself that love grows healthier when everyone stands on their own feet. So, if you're watching this and wondering whether it's too late to reclaim your voice, let me tell you something from the heart. It's never too late to begin again. Take a moment right now to like the video, subscribe to American Granny Stories, and share your thoughts below. Your story might be the one that helps someone else find the courage to choose themselves. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do isn't fighting others, it's quietly deciding to live as our true selves, no matter how late the journey begins.